Hey guys, welcome back to another Minetest tutorial. Today I've got the Minetest logo. Isn't that great? Let's get started. So at this point you should be fairly familiar with using the set node function in Minetest. In the last few lessons we went over how to modify the description of a node in your mod and how to basically enable it to run while you're playing the game in the case of constructing the node. And of course you can play around with all the other options like on punch. It's just simply a matter of changing out the this section right there. Where am I? Yeah, it's just a matter of changing out this little descriptor or callback as it's officially known as. So on construct is a great way to change up the is a way to predictably interact with the block and cause it to do certain things that you program it to do. But there's other ways, and they're still predictable, but there's other ways to cause your code to run like I was talking about on place. And today we're going to be talking about, so moving on to the next chapter, which is node timers and ABMs. So node timers, what are they? What's the use of them, right? Well, before I do that, I just want to mention that before I cover timers, I just want to mention that we, just kind of flew through this chapter, and there's a lot of other cool things in here which you may or may not be able to apply to your code, but if you had fun setting the node, then you might want to check out some of these other things. Of course, we have set node here, but then we also have removing nodes. And remember how when we were making that cube, the terrain was still encapsulated inside of that cube. So, like if you were placing it in a forest, you might want it to automatically cut out the trees and stuff like that. That would be pretty nice. And so one way you can do that is by removing nodes. If you go down even further, it's there's a way to delete whole blocks, and that would be much more preferable than simply one node at a time. But so that's how you would do that, and a few other things that may or may not be useful. Here is loading blocks. It causes the computer to actually load a section of the map, which may not be. So maybe you can write further, you're wanting to build an infinite wall, maybe you can cause the computer to actually load in those blocks and actually create that wall. So anyways, that is just a quick recap or overview of chapter 7. But we need to move on because I want to get to these ABMs. But before that, I thought it'd be kind of cool to cover timers. And we've seen timers before. If you recall, the furnace mod, and if you don't remember how to get there, go to your Minetest folder and go to games, Minetest. I'm doing this from memory, so don't get mad at me if I get this wrong. But games, Minetest game, mods, default, and then I think in there you should be able to see the furnace.lua. Okay, so here's the furnace, and we've got some descriptors, right? It's just general static description of that node. Can dig, I don't know. But here's something interesting on timer. Now, what would a timer be used for, right? In a furnace, why would they need a timer? Well, you probably have guessed it already. It pertains to cook times, and how long that node. So that block needs to, after it's been some node has been added to it, it needs to cook it for a certain amount of time, and once that time is up, it needs to change back to the first furnace. So this is where it starts, right? And then there's a second node called furnace active, and once you put something into it, the whole node changes. It does a whole set node to furnace active, so it completely changes the node. And then it does its cooking, whatever, and this is all, pretend. and then spits out what you need. But here we have on timer, and it's referencing some sort of function. So it would probably be advantageous to take a look at that. And I think that it's important to find examples elsewhere so that you can check yourself as you're working through your own mod. But this is the furnace node timer function, and so it's quite extensive. Here we have, remember how we were passing in position? This is very important because that's how when you're asking about a certain furnace, well, you need to know the position of that furnace, right? So you're going to pass in the furnace. We're also talking about elapsed. It probably pertains to elapsed time. And it looks like here we have some information that's stored in the node, and it's getting that information. It's also getting the inventory of that node, and setting up a few different variables that are going to be used in this function. And then this kind of makes sense. Right, so elapsed means elapsed time, and if it's greater than 0, then it is not done, and it's going to, and update. So update yeah, I see. So as soon as you run the while loop, well, I won't get into that. Anyways, elapsed time is greater than 0, so it's going to go ahead and do something, right? So it's getting the various information, and there's just too much in here to go over, but in general, it's cooking. Comments are huge, very helpful. They will explain pretty much most things, and it's just a great way. In your own coding, I would suggest you add comments for other programmers to easily read through your code. So then, it's going through and doing all kinds of stuff, and I think that more than likely, so here, so here's the while loop, and if I minimize this, then that brings us out and kind of into a different section where it's setting fuel time and various information and writing it to that node for future reference. I see also they're doing some checking if nodes are cookable, if you can or cannot cook them, and that's a setting that is defined when you're just registering a node, right? Or a craft item, you can set whether it's cookable or not. You can also set its group type, and that has a lot to do with cookability. Now we know that there's a timer, right? And once that timer goes off, then the code gets run, and this is extensive code. It does a lot of different things. It checks to see if it's cookable, right? So where is it actually being started? And that is right here, which makes a lot of sense, because on metadata inventory move or on metadata inventory put, that's when you actually place something into the furnace. It will then simply, and this is a very simple function, it's not doing anything fancy like moving in metadata or anything. That's left to the timer function. But this is put into, so all it does is it starts a get node timer position and then sets it to start. You can also set that to stop, but I think there's various different options here. If you have any questions on that, go look at the Lua API. But so we're starting a timer here, and we're setting the position, right? That's very important. It applies to the furnace that we've just placed, and so we then start one, and this is in seconds. So then once this timer goes off at this position, it'll come back to this part of the code, and it will look for the timer, and it'll run the timer code. Okay, so in the textbook, it talks about these timers and how they're started and things like that. And you'll notice a few similarities. This one here, we're actually setting some sort of local variable and setting it equal to a timer. And then from here, then we can do different things to that timer. We can start it or we can stop it. So that's kind of the route that they took. I prefer the one that Furnace used because it's simple and concise. Then after that, we see here that we have a on timer whenever that goes off, and it is simply and it's setting a node at this position, and then some sort of auto doors doors. So that's more what it's doing, obviously. Well, what seems to be the case is that it's opening and closing a door on a timer. So it opens for a certain amount of time, and then it closes. And so that's pretty cool. Now, this is important. When you return false, that ends the timer and prevents it from just continuing. If you set it to true, then the timer will restart for 10.5 seconds and then run the on timer function again. So that is the timers. Okay, so what I want you to do is just something simple. Now, you can take this and run and just go crazy and do a lot of fun stuff, maybe combining some of the elements of the previous lessons. But all that I really want you to do is I want you to combine a few different elements between the furnace and the notebook. First of all, you're going to have to start a timer. And I would start that timer with like a punch. So not on construct, but on punch or something like that. And then just like this function down here, you will need to start it. And you can set it to whatever duration you want, all right? So you're going to have an action or callback which says on punch, and then it basically is copying and pasting this. So that's going to be starting the timer. From there, you're going to need an on timer function. And that's where we go to the textbook and we look for this function here. And what I want you to do is you should have by now created two different nodes, registered two different nodes in your mod, okay? So what you're going to do is you're going to have it switch from, you're going to set the node to some other node in the on timer function. So after a certain amount of time, then it will run this code and it'll change it. Now what you could do is then take this, well, I won't get into that, but that's all I really want you to do is set a timer so that when you punch that node after a certain amount of time, it will change into another or a different node. And that node could be, I mean, it'd be great if it was in your mod, but it doesn't have to be. You can have it change it to dirt and things like that. But this is a great setup for active block modifiers, ABMs, which we will be talking about hopefully next class. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will talk to you next time.